So today, we're looking at something that honestly, so many of us have run into, but it can be incredibly hard to fully wrap our heads around. We're unpacking what you might call the blueprint of human connection, specifically the architecture of avoidant attachment. Because let's face it, relationships are complicated, right? Sometimes it feels like you're literally trying to put together IKEA furniture without the instruction manual, especially when the patterns driving everything are completely invisible to the naked eye. Have you ever felt just a sudden chill in a relationship, like a sudden distance that seemingly came out of absolute nowhere? Well, today, we're acting as relational architects. We're setting aside all the judgment, we're grabbing our magnifying glasses, and we're going to map out exactly from the source material how avoidant attachment is built, how it actually functions, and most importantly, why it even exists in the first place.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever found yourself just completely baffled, trying to decode a partner's sudden distancing behaviors? I mean, everything seems to be going absolutely great, and then, boom, suddenly there's a wall. Why do some partners pull away the literal second things get deep? Why do they seem to actively avoid the messy, beautiful reality of deep human emotion? If you've ever felt like you were trying to solve this giant romantic puzzle but half the pieces were missing, well, this explainer is going to give you that missing context. We're going to break down the exact ways this shows up in romantic relationships, and we're going to start with how we actually talk to each other.
Section 1. Communication and conflict styles. So, let's look at our first major theme here, how these partners communicate on a day-to-day basis. Based on the source material, you'll consistently see a really strong preference for practical, logistical conversations over emotional ones. So try asking something like, "Hey, how did that meeting make you feel?" And you might literally just get a rundown of the grocery list instead. There is this deliberate detour away from emotional topics. They are highly comfortable discussing what needs to happen, the schedule, the concrete facts of the day. But the very moment that conversation shifts to how they're actually feeling about the day, the conversational gates just completely close.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how these everyday communication quirks transform into a totally rigid defense system when an argument happens. You're going to see very specific symptoms that are designed to quickly shut the conflict down. Things like stonewalling, which is just completely withdrawing from the interaction, or rapidly changing the subject just to get off that hot-button issue. You'll also frequently see a sudden, really intense need for time alone to process, which, of course, creates immediate physical distance, and, probably most commonly, a tendency to just minimize the issues at hand. And the thing to remember here, these aren't just random reactions. They are highly effective strategies to create distance and shut down emotional intensity as fast as humanly possible.
Section 2. Navigating intimacy and independence.
And that brings us to a really fascinating tension, the avoidant dilemma. It's this paradox that confuses so many partners. According to the research, an avoidant individual is often completely comfortable with physical intimacy, but heavily uncomfortable with emotional vulnerability. Think about that for a second. They can be physically right next to you, completely physically connected, yet feel emotionally a million miles away. And to maintain this delicate balance, to keep functioning comfortably without feeling totally overwhelmed by that emotional closeness, they actually require regular non-negotiable alone time. It essentially acts as a pressure release valve for the intimacy they just experienced.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark internal conflict regarding independence. It's the classic battle between the me identity and the we identity. To combat the profound discomfort of being a unified we, the avoidant partner places a massive emphasis on separate activities, separate friends, and strictly separate interests. It's a fierce protection of the me. It's kind of like building a giant fortress with a moat around it, just to ensure their individual island remains entirely intact, regardless of the relationship they're in. They simply need to know that they won't get swallowed up.
Section 3. Emotions and decision-making.
So, if someone is fiercely protective of their independence, and they actively deflect emotional vulnerability, how do they actually process their own internal feelings? Well, highly analytically. The source material notes they often have genuine difficulty even naming their feelings. Instead of letting an emotion just wash over them naturally, they want to put it under a microscope. They want to figure out the exact logistics of why it's happening, rather than just sit with the discomfort of it. And because of this heavily intellectualized approach to their own feelings, the unfiltered, raw emotions of a partner, that can feel incredibly overwhelming and just entirely chaotic to them.
And because of this deep-seated need for autonomy, their fierce independence bleeds right into their decision-making process. They have a really strong tendency to make unilateral decisions, with a distinct reluctance to consult their partner on personal matters. Now, they don't actually mean to leave you out in the cold, but in their specific blueprint, checking in or, asking for permission, that feels like a direct threat to that essential me identity we just talked about. To them, independence literally means deciding for yourself.
Section 4. The childhood origins. Now, let's take a deep breath here and slow down for a second, because this right here, this is the big aha moment. We've spent time looking at the frustrating present-day symptoms, but why is this architecture built this way in the first place? Well, read this quote from the source material with me. Adaptations to environments where emotional expression was unsafe or unproductive. So the crucial point is that these behaviors aren't born out of some sort of malicious rejection. Not at all. They are vital childhood survival mechanisms. They were built in an environment where sharing feelings literally got them rejected, ignored, or punished. They learned incredibly early on that relying on others for emotional support was just entirely unproductive.
I really want you to think of this avoidant blueprint as a protective childhood shield. Back when they were young and vulnerable, this attachment style was incredibly successful. By minimizing their emotional needs, by learning to strictly rely only on themselves, and by keeping a really safe distance from unpredictable caregivers, they protected themselves. It was a brilliant, completely necessary architectural design for the exact environment they were forced to grow up in. It kept them safe.
Section 5. Barriers to adult connection. Let's move to the present day and see how this builds into the reality of modern romantic relationships, because this is really the tragedy of the avoidant attachment style. While these patterns perfectly protected the person in childhood, they create massive, massive barriers to intimate connection now. The very same protective shield that safely guarded them when they were little is now a heavy stone wall actively blocking intimacy with their adult partner. What was once their absolute greatest survival tool is now the exact thing preventing them from achieving the deep connected relationship they probably, on some level, really want. The architecture is it's outdated for their current environment. Which leaves us here at our final thought. How is understanding these barriers the very first step to dismantling them? Well, because when you see the stonewalling, or that unilateral decision-making, not as a lack of love, but as an ancient childhood shield raised in a moment of perceived threat, honestly, everything changes. Empathy replaces frustration. Now, understanding the architecture absolutely doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does give both partners the blueprint needed to finally start renovating the relationship together. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the source material. I really hope this explainer leaves you with a fresh, empathetic perspective on the incredibly complex structures of the human heart. Until next time, keep seeking to understand.